There are plenty of tropes synonymous with horror, including unmaskings, jump scares, creative gore, and last-minute revelations. But another theme that's rife in the genre is betrayal. When there's a serial killer on the loose and bodies start to pile up, it's only a matter of time before the survivors turn on one another. And when there's a horde of monsters closing in, some of these so-called heroes may desert their friends to guarantee their own safety. Also, twists can often play a prominent role in horror, so it shouldn't be too surprising when one of the good guys has a sudden change in loyalty to save their own skin. Over the years, we've seen treachery take many forms throughout the horror medium. Sometimes the traitor in question was putting on a front from the get-go and always intended to deceive their friends. Other times, the betrayer tried to fight on the side of angels before desperation and fear urged them to put their own interests first. Even though betrayal is unpleasant for anyone to experience, the following 10 entries on this list took backstabbing to a whole new level. I'm Sean Ferry for What Culture Horror, and here are the 10 worst betrayals in horror movie history. Number 10. Scud to Blade, Blade 2. Blade 2 kicks off with the Daywalker curing his friend Whistler of vampirism before returning to his base. While there, Whistler takes an instant dislike toward Blade's new weaponsmith, Scud. Scud is rebellious and confrontational, but seems loyal to the cause, especially since Blade saved him from a vampire attack, or so it seems. When Blade discovers ubervamps called Reapers have invaded the city, the titular character is forced to join forces with the vampire leader, Damaskinos. However, after the Reaper threat is quashed, Damaskinos double-crosses Blade, to the surprise of, well, nobody. As Blade tries to blow the bloodsuckers up with a small explosive, nothing happens when he flicks the switch, with Scud then explaining that he programmed the bomb not to detonate since he was working alongside Damaskinos the whole time. What makes Scud's change in loyalty more hard-hitting is the fact that he allied with the same monsters that nearly killed him to betray the man who saved his life. Fortunately, Scud's traitorous turn doesn't last long, as moments later he spills the beans. Blade admits he knew that he was a rat all along before blowing his duplicitous sidekick to Kingdom Come. Number 9. Cyrus to Kalina, 13 Ghosts. Loosely based on the 1960 film of the same name, 13 Ghosts follows Arthur, a family man who inherits the mansion of his deceased uncle, Cyrus Criticus. Shortly after moving in, Arthur discovers his new home is populated by hostile spectres, and he and his family are assisted by spirit expert Kalina as they navigate through the labyrinth-like house. Just to complicate things further, Arthur learns his eccentric uncle isn't exactly dead. It turns out Cyrus faked his death to lure Arthur's family into the house, since he needs them to activate a machine that'll grant him godlike power. On top of that, Kalina is unveiled to be Cyrus's lover and has been manipulating Arthur's family from the beginning. As he puts the final touches onto his plan, Cyrus orders Kalina to abduct the Criticus children to ensure Arthur does as he asks. Kalina balks at this suggestion, but comes around a few seconds later. Sadly, Kalina's defiance cost her dearly. Seeing her as disloyal, Cyrus traps Kalina into a sealed chamber where she is squished to death by contracting walls. She may have been wicked, but Kalina's hesitation towards harming children proved she had a conscience. Number 8. Tedeschi to Cecilia, Immaculate. In this nunsploitation flick, virgin nun Cecilia falls pregnant shortly after moving to a convent. Although Cecilia is understandably terrified, Father Sal Tedeschi consoles her, reassuring her that she's been chosen by God. Obviously, Tedeschi supports Cecilia more than anyone since he believes the child's birth will bring about a resurgence in faith. However, he also seems to genuinely care about Cecilia, constantly monitoring her physical and mental well-being. But over time, Cecilia realizes Tedeschi's motivations are far from pure. It turns out Tedeschi is a geneticist who hopes to create a new messiah by impregnating nuns with the genetic code of Jesus Christ. Despite the fact that Tedeschi's experiments have always ended in failure, he refuses to give up, in turn having Cecilia impregnated with Christ's DNA. In that moment, it's apparent he never cared for Cecilia and merely used her as a means to an end to justify his life's work. Although Tedeschi initially came across as a mentor and friend, he seems more like a cattle breeder when his motivation becomes clear, especially after he brands Cecilia's feet with a burning cross. Number 7. Quentin to Everybody, Cube. In sci-fi mindbender Cube, police officer Quentin awakens inside a maze-like prison alongside 5 strangers. Many of the rooms contain lethal booby traps, so Quentin believes their best chance of survival is to work as a team. Despite the hostility in the group, Quentin tries to keep everybody unified. Although he and fellow prisoner Holloway don't get on, Quentin seems like a solid team leader, even checking on Holloway when he believes she's been poisoned by one of the traps. But as the team starts losing hope, Quentin becomes unhinged, viciously attacking his teammates, threatening to abandon them and attempting attempting to sexually assault one of them. And when Holloway falls out of the prison's edge, Quentin instinctively grabs her, but then lets her plummet to her death. When the group figure out where the exit is, they feel hopeful for the first time in days. Sadly, Quentin is too far gone by this point, fatally wounding the others even when they're inches away from freedom. In hindsight, it seems as if Quentin only helped out because he liked playing the hero, which may explain why he lost his mind when he realized he had nothing to contribute. Number 6. The Summerisle Community to Sergeant Neil Howie, the Wicker Man. In classic British folk horror The Wicker Man, Sergeant Neil Howie heads to the Scottish island of Summerisle to investigate the disappearance of a young girl called Rowan Morrison. Being a devout Christian, Howie is aghast when he sees the Summerisle community indulging in Celtic paganism and sexual rituals. And when the residents claim Rowan never existed, Howie begins to suspect the people are readying to sacrifice the innocent girl to appease their gods. Though Howie fears for his life, he carries on with his investigation, ultimately locating Rowan. However, as he prepares to leave the island, Howie is horrified to see Rowan willingly rush towards the community's leader, Lord Summerisle. Worse still, Summerisle informs Howie that they always intended for him to be the human sacrifice. Howie is then placed inside an immense wicker statue where he's incinerated. The more you think about Howie's demise, the more tragic it is. If the honourable police officer didn't go out of his way to find the child, he would have never met with such a terrible fate. Also, it's depressing that Howie believed he was taking Rowan to safety, oblivious she was leading him to his doom. Number 5. Joan to Annie, Hereditary. In Ari Aster's supernatural drama Hereditary, miniature artist Annie is left grief-stricken after the death of her antagonistic mother, Ellen. Just as Annie tries to get back on track, her daughter Charlie is decapitated in a freak accident. While Annie wallows in self-pity, a mysterious woman called Joan befriends her at her support group, insisting she can speak to her deceased daughter in a seance. Even though Annie repeatedly dismisses Joan, she won't take no for an answer, almost as if Joan doesn't want Annie to suffer like she did. But after Annie has multiple paranormal encounters, she learns that Joan belongs to a sinister cult. Not only that, Joan was an acolyte for Ellen, who intended to use Annie's son as a vessel to summon a demon known as Paimon. Although Joan acted like she cared for Annie, she was merely using her to fulfill Ellen's wishes. This treachery feels like a double whammy, since Annie wasn't just betrayed by Joan, but by her own mother. Although Ellen showed some affection toward Annie's family, it was purely to find a suitable host for her master. Number 4. Burke to Ripley, Aliens. Aliens opens up with Ripley awakening on a spaceship owned by Weyland-Yutani. Though she is rattled by her experience with the xenomorph that killed her crew, a representative called Burke assures Ripley that she's safe. When Burke loses contact with a colony residing near a xenomorph nest, Ripley agrees to go with him to investigate, hoping to wipe out the extraterrestrials for good. At this point, Ripley knows for a fact that Weyland-Yutani intended to weaponize the acid-blooded beasts, so there's no reason why she should trust Burke. However, Burke comes across as a genuinely nice guy, since he goes out of his way to comfort Ripley at every opportunity. Although Ash from the previous film also feigned loyalty towards Ripley, Burke acts like he doesn't have a bad bone in his body. Sadly, Ripley learns the reason why the colonists went missing is because Burke commanded them to go into the xenomorph's nest, where they were killed, an order Burke made hoping to locate the aliens' eggs and sell them for a profit. When Ripley threatens to expose him, Burke seals her and Orphan Newt in a room with 2 facehuggers, hoping to smuggle the embryos through their bodies. What's worse is Burke displays zero regret over his actions, calling Ripley sad and pathetic when she calls him out. As terrifying as the xenomorphs are, Burke might be worse. Number 3. Julia to Channard, Hellbound, Hellraiser II. The original Hellraiser concluded with Kirsty's murderous stepmother, Julia Cotton, being banished to the Cenobites dimension. But in Hellbound, Hellraiser II, Julia is revived by Kirsty's psychiatrist, Dr. Philip Channard. If it wasn't for Channard, Julia would have endured unimaginable tortures until the end of time. Since Channard sacrificed his mentally ill patients to bring Julia back from the dead, he seems to be just as evil as she is. Basically, they're a match made in hell. So how does Julia show her gratitude? Well, by sacrificing Channard to an ancient god, turning the Doctor into a Cenobite in the process. Although Channard has committed atrocities, it's hard not to feel at least a tiny bit bad for him after all he's done for Julia. What's worse is that the transformation process looks excruciating, since organic machines drain Channard's body of blood, inject him with demonic chemicals, stuff a worm demon down his throat, and burrow razor wires through his face. While he screams in agony, Julia gleefully taunts Channard, not showing one shred of remorse. Even though Julia seemed twisted in the first film, this scene showed how utterly malevolent she was. Number 2. Rose to Chris, Get Out. In Jordan Peele's directorial debut, Get Out, young black man Chris is anxious about meeting the family of his white girlfriend, Rose Armitage. Though she tries to reassure him, Chris's skepticism is completely warranted, as shortly after arriving at the house, Chris learns the Armitages abduct black individuals and transplant the consciousness of white people into their bodies, often as a means to prolong their lives. Rose is crucial to this operation since it's her duty to seduce black people and lure them to her family home. Mere minutes after Chris is being prepped for the brain-altering surgery, Rose begins scouring the web for her next victim, highlighting how little she cared for her so-called boyfriend. This betrayal has an even bigger gut punch upon re-watching Get Out, since it's clear Rose's affection toward Chris hid an ulterior motive, especially during the car accident sequence. After Rose and Chris get into a fender bender, a police officer asks for Chris's driver's license, despite the fact he wasn't driving. Rose orders Chris not to show his ID, seemingly protecting her boyfriend from a racist police officer. But after revisiting this scene, it's obvious Rose wasn't defending Chris, but trying to avoid a paper trail when he inevitably goes missing. Number 1. Henry West to the survivors 28 days later. In 28 days later, courier Jim awakens from a coma, only to learn a virus has turned the masses into zombie-like creatures. As he wanders through London, Jim joins forces with other survivors, Selena, Frank, and Frank's daughter, Hannah. Frank explains they are following a military radio broadcast, which is offering sanctuary and a cure for the virus. When Frank becomes infected, he's about to attack Hannah before being shot dead by a military unit, led by Major Henry West. Henry tells Jim he sent out the broadcast and invites the group to a fortified mansion, where he treats his guests with a banquet. Despite Henry's welcoming demeanor, it's revealed to be a ruse, as he informs Jim that he pretended to have the cure to entice women into his fortress and turn them into sex slaves for his squad. And when Jim tries to protect Selena and Hannah, Henry has him locked up and prepared for execution. 28 Days Later has plenty of gore, but it's more disturbing watching the soldiers preparing to rape 2 females, one of whom is a teenager, after forcing them to wear skimpy dresses. Even though Henry seemed to have the survivors' best interests at heart, he turned out to be more terrifying than the infected.